Hi, welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph Demetrius, one of the astrologers. The portrait this week is from our musician series, which we had stopped, but Lonnie said, look what's going on in the news. Who's in the news? And I went to the news today, and who passed away but Loretta Lynn, as she was known as the coal miner's daughter. She passed away at age 90. She was born April 14th, 1932. 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Van Leer, Kentucky. Obviously, an Aries. In fact, not just an Aries, but an 8th house Aries. So, in other words, the sun is now in Aries in a Mars-ruled sign. Better yet, the sun is not alone. The sun's there with Uranus, close to the sun. The Uranus is at 19 degrees, 5 degrees away. And many times we find that people who are propelled to stardom, they have a lot of electricity, a lot of spark, have Uranus close to the sun or on one of the major angles usually. Sometimes the moon, but it's usually the sun and the major angles, usually the rising or the setting. She also has Mercury at 17 degrees, so within 2 degrees of the Uranus. Vesta at 11 degrees, and Mars at 8 degrees. So that means Mars is in its rulership position, its masculine rulership. It means it's extrovert, it's dynamic. It's as strong pretty much as Mars gets to being Mars, okay? Conjunct Vesta, when you have that configuration, when you see that configuration, Vesta is the flame. Mars is hot already. It supercharges it. It tends to give the person a huge amount of energy, and it's in the house of management. The ability to manage shared resources well. This person's a natural-born manager. She will always step up. Nothing's going to make her not step up. With the Vesta there, with the Mercury there, really good engaging skills. Interestingly, he has Mercury retrograde. She has Mercury retrograde. So she's someone who thinks about what she's going to say before she says it. That's one thing with Mercury retrograde. Those people will practice what they're going to say before they say it. A lot of times if you live with a person who has Mercury retrograde, you hear them talking to themselves in the bathroom. Why? Because they're practicing their lines. Because they're doing an interior version before they do an exterior version. Retrograde, interior, direct, exterior. Okay? So she's got these great engaging skills. It's conjunct Uranus, high electricity, conjunct the sun. So all in the 8th house. Powerful. Okay? Now, because the sun is in the 8th house in Aries, that means she has Virgo rising. Okay? 17 degrees Virgo at 4 p.m. 4 p.m. may be an approximate. Sometimes people are born right on the hour too. But 4 p.m. we have 17 degrees. What's interesting is that she has the south node at 25 degrees Virgo, which puts the north node at 25 degrees Pisces. Okay? From the 1st to the 7th house. People who have that at the axis, tend to have a very strong connection with their matrilineal line, like a reincarnational connection. They've been born to the same group of women and mothers multiple times. It's also a position that you find in actors a lot of times, because it puts them very much in touch with their reincarnational experiences, and actors are able to draw upon their reincarnational memories of these other lifetimes in playing roles. It's funny when you see all these actors who play in roles about like medieval times, or with especially the roles of the 17 and 1800s. Well, that wasn't that long ago. And you oftentimes feel that those actors were drawing from their history, their reincarnational history in those periods of time to play those roles. That's something you see a lot in actors, but she has it, which means that she can draw from her reincarnational depth, but she's also very connected to her family. What's interesting is that with the Neptune at 5 degrees Virgo, it's in what's called the Gogolon spot. It's in the 1st house. Remember, we use whole sign houses. So as long as it's in the same sign, it's in the house. Just because it's above the ascendant doesn't mean it's in the 12th house. No, it's angular. But the Neptune is a powerful planet in terms of the imagination, and it's also a good money planet, and it's in Virgo. So this person, she was a perfectionist. So Virgo rising means she's a perfectionist. She has Mercury, the ruler of Virgo, in the 8th house. She could drive people to be perfectionists. I imagine when she was working with a band, she kept driving them until they got it perfect, right? And you see this a lot with performers. They're perfectionists. You oftentimes find Virgo in the charts of actors and musicians. They just keep working on it until they get every little detail. They always say, geniuses in the details. And then she has the moon with Jupiter in Leo in the 12th house. The 12th house is the world of the imagination. It's also the studio. And you find this with a lot of musicians, also a lot of movie actors, more than stage actors, because they like that protected space of the studio. You put her in a music studio, and she just opens up. That moon and that Jupiter and Leo just goes, whoa. Okay, I just bloom. And of course, she did tremendously well from her recordings. Now, what's funny is that I'm not that familiar with her music, okay? Which doesn't mean I don't like country western music, because I do. I composed music for many years and played pretty much my entire life, composed and sang for many years. So I'm very widely read, you might say, in music, and I like a lot of country western stars. I just don't know her music that much. I know more about Loretta Lynn from the movie Coal Miner's Daughter, with Sissy Spacek playing her, than I do from knowing her own music. But looking at this chart, one thing that's really interesting is her similarity to other musicians. There's a great similarity to her chart and Stevie Nicks. Isn't that interesting? Stevie Nicks works in a completely different style, but she's also an Aries. She has a lot of the same characteristics in her chart. Very, very strong Mars, very strong Mercury. Okay? Mars is what? Her Mars, her Mercury, her Uranus, her Sun. That's Mars ruled. Okay? Mercury in her chart rules her Venus in Gemini at the midheaven. Venus in Gemini, the arts as a career in the 10th house, coming to great acclaim. And it also rules the rising, the ascendant, the south node, and the Neptune. So, these are very powerful. Interestingly, she doesn't have anything in Mars's other sign, Scorpio, the feminine projection of Mars. But look at this chart. So much of the chart is above the horizon. Her life was lived out in the world. And you see this with people whose lives are very, very public. All the planets are above the horizon. The only thing that's actually below the horizon are two bodies, actually. Saturn, her father, right? You would think her father, in Aquarius, and two asteroids, Ceres, the Shepherd, and Pallas Athena. But everything else is above the horizon. Now, interestingly, there's a thinking, we always tend to think of Saturn as the father, but the reality is that in many times in charts, if the sun's above the horizon in the daytime chart, the sun will actually represent the father. And so the sun, very powerful in exaltations. The sun in Aries, an exalted sign. In the 8th house, an exalted sign, a coal miner's daughter. And in fact, the midheaven, Gemini. Gemini is the perpetual kid. They're always the kid, the twins. So her picture of her in the world was always as the daughter, as the kid. And, it goes back, the Gemini goes back to the Mercury, which is that Venus in Aries, which goes to the Mars. So a coal miner's daughter, you look at the 8th house, all that Aries, isn't that kind of like, an intense experience? Mining is a collective management of resources. No one goes out very much mining by themselves. You might prospect, but you don't mine by yourselves. It's a big cooperative project. But it's a fascinating chart. That moon in the 12th house, though, is interesting. It really shows this great talent in the studio, along with the Jupiter. In the studio, she would be generous, and she'd be emotional, and she'd be flexible. But it's Leo. She would be commanding. And realize, like Stevie Nicks, she was tiny. She was 5'2" tall. She was not a big, commanding person. She was this little woman, just like Stevie Nicks. And yet they both have this tremendous drive to accomplish and get things done. And that Mars and Aries conjunct Vesta in the 8th house, that is a powerhouse. This woman was a powerhouse. What's funny is that the way people saw her was the Virgo rising. This nice young girl, Virgo rising, the Virgin. Why is Virgo where it is in the zodiac? Well, first of all, Virgo is the largest constellation. But it's also that a lot of births are conceived during Christmas, during the deepest dark, after the winter solstice. 9 months after there, you get the Virgos. Well, there tend to be a lot of feminine births there, but women were very, very valued in the agricultural world because during the sorting of foods, they were so helpful. Also, the daughters tend to stay with the family longer. So it was very important to have, enough young women as part of your family to, guarantee the future of your family. But that's Virgo rising. So she was always seen very much as a girl. And yet it goes back to that Mars in the 8th house. She's the girl, but boy, is she a firecracker. So it's a very interesting chart. And what's funny is that she, like Stevie Nicks, has a chart that is very similar to the women actresses that we did portraits of who played in the movies action roles. And it's Mars, Mercury ruled things. You saw that all over those charts. Jessica Chastain, in Aries. You saw it all over those charts. Mars and Aries, dynamic. And they actually had charts. These two would have made great actresses in action movies if they hadn't been musicians. How's that for a little crossover? So that's Loretta, Lynn. I hope you found that interesting. I should point out too, because she did just pass away, she passed away just at the point when there was just after a big mutable cross. In other words, there were major planets in all the mutable signs. So Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And the cross was actually filled out by the moon in Sagittarius, which just had passed just before she passed away. And you have, the South Node, this reincarnational point at 25 degrees Virgo, and Mercury had just gone direct right about there, 24 degrees. Opposite it is Neptune on the other node at 23 degrees Pisces. And then Mars was at 21 degrees Gemini. It just passed over her midheaven and her Venus. And then the Sagittarius passed through an area that was probably related to her part of fortune in her 4th house. So it really triggered her chart. And interestingly, Jupiter is retrograde right now in Aries. And so it went all the way up about to her Mars, and then it turned retrograde and is heading back towards Pisces at this time. So, it brought much in her life into focus. And the other interesting thing was that in the recent years, she had her Saturn, an additional Saturn return, where she had Saturn natally in 4 degrees Aquarius. Saturn currently is 18 degrees Aquarius. It had passed over. She had another Saturn return. And let's see, where is Uranus? And of course, she had already passed her Uranus return, which happens usually about age 84, because she has Uranus in Aries, like I said, so close to her sun, but Uranus is now in Taurus. So that Uranus return at 84, 86, around there, is not something that most people experience. But it really is a very kind of liberating time. It's very similar to the age 40, when the Kundalini energy rises up your spine and tries to blow the top of your head off, and you realize it's not your responsibilities that matter, but your possibilities. And you get used, around age 39, 40, 41, you get used to people being mad at you all the time. Someone's always mad at you during your Uranus return, because your freedom opens up, your possibilities open up, and it's not convenient for the people around you. Well, she went through that again with the Uranus return, and then, of course, Uranus went past and is now in Taurus. And in fact, it was just making contact with her natal Chiron. So some little sudden changes in health there. That's Loretta Lynn, very interesting chart. I hope you found it interesting. Remember, come see us at Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube for our portraits. We do them every Tuesday. We do the forecasts every Friday. If you push the little bell, you get reminded. When you subscribe, you get reminded of when they come up. You can also go to planetarycalendar.com to find your calendars. At this time, we have, of course, we're selling the 2023s, but who knows when you're going to be watching this. But you always want to know what's going on, don't you? And until next time, be well.